This is a kind of slightly off-the-wall presentation, I'm guessing, because PLASA is all about what happens in the live venue and live production. And here we're going to look at taking a show out of a live venue to the wider audience of TV, cinema, radio, and so on. Just out of interest, does anybody here, or I basically want to see whether there's anyone from broadcast, post-production side of things, or whether you're all the live side of things. So if you're involved in live stuff, can you stick your hands up? Okay, and anyone from broadcast? 3. Okay. Well, I'll try and skew it accordingly, and basically what I want to do is take you through the interface of how we capture the show, what we do in terms of getting it onto our recorded media, what we do when we take it away and play with it, and how it eventually ends up. I've chosen to look at Adele rather than just talking generally about live music broadcast. We did this show at the Albert Hall towards the end of last year. It went to cinema, DVD, TV, and CD. So it's quite an interesting case study for seeing just how those final, the difference in the nuances between producing a soundtrack for cinema and producing it for home cinema and so on. A quick introduction to me. I've worked in live music recording for 25 years. I've done the BRIT Awards for the last 18 years, the MTV Europe Music Awards for the last 10 years, Classical Brits for 12 years. I've worked on multi-artist and single artist shows all around the world. And I was quite excited when our Queen of Pop, 6-time Grammy winner and 2 times BRIT winner, wanted me to look after the soundtrack for her show, which was basically her return after having, as we all know, problems with her vocal cords. And is she going to come back? Is she going to make album 23, 24, 25? And I think this gig firmly established that she was back on the circuit and really quite amazing. I've got a couple of tracks off the DVD that I'll play to you along the way. But just a quick reminder of the brilliance of our Queen of Pop. Biggest selling digital album of all time in the USA. When you think about who she's up against in terms of archive albums, Beatles, Stones, whatever, that's quite an extraordinary achievement. Rolling in the Deep, 65 weeks in the charts. The live version of Someone Like You that I recorded at the Brits in 2011, the Brits is now live to air and live to iTunes. The iTunes result of that made her sit at #1 in the UK charts for over 10 weeks. She's recently been announced as the wealthiest young British musician with assets of 20 million. And this DVD or this recording that we're going to talk about today, when the DVD was released 2 weeks before Christmas last year, in 1 week, it was the biggest selling music DVD of 2011. So this was quite a special one to work on, and quite an honor to be involved in something that was so amazing. So look at now what our technical interface is in terms of picking it up from the live show. We take a direct feed of each of the mics that the PA company is using. All the mics on the stage arrive at the side of the stage in something called a splitter, and that allows front of house to take their feed for mixing for the live audience. It allows monitors to take their feed for keeping the guys on the stage happy, and it allows us to take a feed out to the broadcast truck. The only thing we add to those stage mics is an array of audience mics. The Albert Hall, if we imagine this was the Albert Hall, I've put an array of 8 mics around the balconies. We had 2 mics from the roof centrally, and we had 4 rifles shooting from the side of the stage. Why so many? Well, it's a big old hall, and anyone who's worked in the Albert Hall knows that with the RT in there, it can be quite a hard thing to get the PA right for without just having to pin it against the back wall, which isn't really Adele's style. there's a lot of audience reaction to someone like Adele, a lot of sing-alongs, a lot of squeaks, shouts, and song recognition, applause, and so on. We use that many mics so that we've got a more local capture of the audience. If we were simply to shoot 2 rifles off the stage, we'd mainly be hearing the PA, and however good the PA mix is, that's not really audience reaction. These days, all our feeds from the stage come down a fibre to the recording truck that's parked outside the venue alongside the outside broadcast units looking after the pictures. Days of old, we would run copper multi-cores from the splitters out to mic amps, probably in the desk in the recording truck. So you were running mic level signals over potentially 400 or 500 meters. Not the best result for audio, and if you listen to old live albums, live recordings, they're generally sort of full of buzzes and crackles and farts, or they've been re-recorded to get over that. But now we have this crystal clear. We park our mic amps beside the stage. They're remotely controlled from the console. We take a single fibre, which will take up to 128 channels, and that's our link. So in the same benefits of not using copper, we don't have any earthing problems. We're completely isolated from anything that's going on in the hall, and as importantly, they're isolated from us. So we don't have mains bars, we don't have those kind of problems, we don't have to lift earths and so on like we used to spend hours doing. The recording mobile that I used for Adele was the floating earth truck. It's a small footprint truck with an SSL C200. For those of you who don't know the SSL, it's a damn good desk for doing this kind of show. It looks like an analog desk. You've got knobs on every channel. You've got full EQ, you've got full aux sends, you've got full dynamics control. You can get at anything, and more importantly, when a live show's going on and you want to spider your way around the desk and fix things on every channel you can get your hands on, you don't have this problem with some digital desks of having to call this channel up. Now it's here. Oh, I want that channel. Now it's here. You can just get on with it, and it works in layers. It's a lovely desk. We record onto Pyramix as a multi-track system, which on the surface does the same job as Pro Tools or Nuendo or Logic or anything else. But in my experience, Pyramix is the most bulletproof of live recording multi-tracks, and there are certain ones that have let us down along the way. You get to the end of a 2-hour show, you hit stop on your computer, and you get a little rotating colour wheel telling you that you haven't got the gig. And you sit there staring at the colour wheel wondering what to say to the artist and the client. So you need bulletproof toys in the same way that you do for your live sound consoles and so on. In terms of effects units, my favourites, for those of you who are interested, the TC System 6000, which is a multi-effects processor. It does everything from reverbs to mastering tools. I think it's the best bit of studio kit anyone's ever made, and I always have one of those wherever I am. Vocal distressors, my favourite, or the distressor rather, is my favourite. Vocal compression, DBX 902 DSs, usual lexicon reverbs and delays and so on. So that's the gamut of toys that I've then got to play with. While I'm recording it to multi-track, I'm making a stereo monitor mix. This is a reference for the director. It's going to be a reference for them while they're editing the pictures until it finally gets replaced with my remix a little way down the stream. The reason I've put Goose at the end of that is because in the same way that I was talking about little colour wheels staring at you at the end of a 2-hour show, if for some reason we don't have the multi-track recording, which hasn't happened, but if for any reason we couldn't go any further, there is a stereo mix that exists, so that's my get out of shit kit. And I concentrate quite hard on that stereo mix. As I say, I've never had to rely on it, but you know, if we did, I'd try and make that as close to the final mix as I can. It's also nicer for the editor, because when he's sitting there for maybe on something like Adele 2 months, he's listening to something reasonable rather than another late fade on the vocal or whatever. So we take the stage feeds into our truck outside and we pass on the stereo, or the live mix, if you like, in this case a stereo reference mix, to the outside broadcast unit. We'll look at the outside broadcast link a little more in detail. Let's just have a look at the link to front of house. Dave McDonald, Adele's sound designer, he's worked with her from day one. They have a fantastic relationship. He was able to pass on some good gems of knowledge to me about the running of the show, because he'd done it a few times. And generally, a front of house mixer will give me a crib list of, you know, where the backing vocals are doing what, when it switches from electric to acoustic guitar, all these things. So I'll get a set list with front of house notes on it, which is always very handy. And also have formative chats and say, okay, how many inputs are we looking at? Where are your splits going to be? When do you want us to patch into you? I try and, when I'm interfacing with a live show, I'm very conscious of the pressures that they're under to put a show on. Okay, if you know, we're capturing it, we've got a responsibility to several million audience, but if their show for 10,000 people doesn't work, we ain't got a show either. So we try and leave them as much as we can to, you know, do their thing, and we try and be as invisible as possible, patching in and checking and so on. If we have a problem, we try and absolutely work out that it's not our fault before we go, oh, you got a second. So we get, as I mentioned just now, we get our feeds from the splitters. An existing show, a touring show, even more importantly, you know, they've just come from venue to venue. They've probably been up most of the night. They've done the get-in, and the last thing they want is us causing any problems. So we just try and be as neat as we can with the whole thing. We will occasionally beg favours, such as borrowing a few lines from them if we want to put 4 audience mics at the front of house position in, say, Wembley Stadium. It's very handy if we can just borrow 4 lines on their digital fibre back to the stage. So, you know, we do get a lot of help from them. Monitor position is a very key place for us, because that's our, normally, I keep looking over there because normally the splitters are on your stage left. And that's traditionally where the monitor position is as well. The monitor engineer is our first point of contact if we have a problem. I have one of my guys from the truck on radio comms, and he will basically have to develop a very good relationship with that monitor engineer, because if we need some help when something suddenly disappears or appears in the wrong place, those are the people we will talk to initially. There's one invention along the way. It's very old now. It started as MADI 56, now MADI 64. MADI, multiplexed audio digital interface, is a system of taking, if the front of house guy, for example, was on a Digico console, we could just take a MADI feed from him and we plug that into our MADI recorder. Okay, why don't we do that? Front of house channel by channel levels tend not to be optimized for recording. They're optimized for how his gain structure works on his desk and so on. When we're recording, we try and get as much use out of the bit range on the digital signal as we can. So we're aiming to peak at kind of -2, -3, tiny bits of safety margin. Front of house will generally be a bit more conservative than that, and there are some cases where I've been given a front of house mix, and you know, all their levels are peaking down around -20. Works fine for them on a 24-bit or floating bit console, but it's not what we want to record to get a great result. The other problem with MADI is that if we're going to take MADI, we need to then say, right, we're going to sync your entire system with this video clock, and that's the point where most of them go, no, you're not, because you know, they would be terrified of their system clicking, and a 20 kilowatt system clicking is quite a nasty thing. So although that MADI link would speed up the setup, and a lot of people say, why don't you just take their MADI feed? A lot of reasons, gain structure being probably one of the most important ones. The outside broadcast unit, these are the guys looking after the picture. We're a kind of, in terms of production, the sound mobile is a sort of sub-mobile to the main picture OB unit. So they will generally have sorted out parking and power and logistics issues on our behalf. So we tell them what our footprint is and what we need, and they'll then sort that. So we leave them mostly to handle that side of things. Excuse me. Feeds to and from them. we're obviously giving them our music mix. We get what we call a TX return from them, which is their transmission output, just to check that they're not doing anything horrid along the way, or that our feed to them hasn't gone a bit awry. They send us timecode, they send us video sync, they send us a couple of picture feeds, they'll send us the live cut, and also we always ask for a wide shot of the stage. You can be happily watching a live cut, not realizing that an entire brass band has marched on, for argument's sake. So we're generally looking at the wide, and we've got some detail if we want it on the close-up pictures. We put comms between us. We have production talkback, so we're listening to the director and the PA. I have tried for years and years to get the director to use a keyed talkback to us, but directors are used to the entire world listening to them. So despite the fact we're mixing audio, we've got to have this noise coming out of a little box beside us, because there's no other way around it, it would appear. We have talked to the sound guys in the OB truck. Now, if we're doing a single artist show, they've got 2 faders up on the desk, that's our mix. But they also look after the comms for all the cameras, they're looking after the comms to us, they're looking after comms to floor manager. The guy, so that'll be one of the 2 guys. The other guy will be making sure that our feed is going correctly to all the VT machines and so on. So even though they're not actually mixing anything, they're still quite busy making sure that all the feeds and comms are going in the right direction. Just a quick aside about broadcast levels, and this would affect anyone. The odd times where it's a grab it and run situation, can we take a feed off your front of house desk to broadcast? We have a very rigid level requirement in broadcast, which isn't digital peak. We record all our multi-tracks digital peak, anything that's going in stems is digital peak, but a final output, a stereo transmission output, is always at the old standard of peak program meter 6, which equates, give or take, to -10 digits. So if you turn your output down to -10, they'll be very happy bunnies if you're feeding them anything. Quick word on, this is Adele's obviously single artist show. The multi-artist shows that I do, and there's some nice big smelly ones coming up. We've got the Diamond Jubilee at the beginning of June, 20 artists back-to-back, live to air, 2 hours, straight out to the world. Any presentation I give to the OB unit. So coming off the splits, if you've got presenter mics or you've got VT feeds or you've got sound effects or whatever, generally they will go direct to the OB truck and we'll just concentrate on mixing the music. So my recording crew for Adele, single artist, it's quite compact. There's me mixing the music, Dave Rowell, Craig, Brett, Bruce, 4 assistant engineers involved in rigging the audience mics, plugging into the front of house splits, another guy looking after the multi-tracks and ensuring they're recording properly, another guy looking after the truck and making sure that all the truck and everything is working while I'm tied to the desk in a light sweat during a live broadcast. You may notice Grace Alington has the same surname as me. That's my niece, who is probably the biggest fan of Adele I've ever met, so I thought she could come along and make the teas and coffees. And then the Floating Earth truck, FE, Floating Earth, Steve Long looks after the kind of administrative side of that, and Kate, my MD at Richmond Studios Productions, again dealing with the client while we're all just getting on and making sure we're recording it well. So before that's the capture process. That we've now got this at the end of the show on a main and a backup digital multi-track. For Adele, it was about 64 tracks deep. It was about 48 bands, 16 strings, 14 audience. No, it's a bit more, isn't it? 72, something like that. So we've got those as discrete tracks on 2 Pyramix systems. And that's job done. We then take those as individual WAV files, and we'll go on to post-production in a minute. Any quick questions on that capture process and the interface with front of house monitors? Anyone? Good.
Oh, sorry.
Just a quick one.
Yes.
The splitter.
Yeah.
I thought the split for the monitor mix and the front of house.
Yeah.
So you have to split it 3 ways, in fact.
Yes.
Analog mic signals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, but one advantage that we've got with using these remote mic amps and fibre, so we have no earthing issues, no connectivity problems, is that we actually now, we do this with a lot of systems now, we don't actually need a transformer or an active splitter to separate us. You know, these things were really designed when you've got 3 different mains and 3 different earthing systems and so on. And quite a lot of the time now, we'll simply take a parallel of the stage box outputs. So we don't, not transformed, it's not active, it's just a direct parallel of the feed, because the mic amps are on the same power that the monitor control position is, and we can patch straight in. It's a 10K impedance mic amp, it's not going to affect anything. So yeah, most splits have the 3 outputs. Yes? Me. They're on the desk. There are occasions where we use something like a CobraNet system, for example, the audience mics I would have done on Cobras, and these are just little 8-way boxes that you can link together and get another MADI feed out the end of them, and they have to be controlled by a laptop. So I leave that to someone at the back of the truck just to make sure audience levels are fine. But mine are on the SSL. They are controlled by the SSL mic pots at the top of the channel.
So front of house tech feed after those mics?
No, they do their own mic gaining. We do our own mic gaining, and unless they're on a linked system, monitors will do their own mic gaining.
Oh, so the box isn't active?
No, the mic amps that we put in place only come to us. So what's available at the split point is a mic level feed from the stage. So yeah, and that's again part of the reason for not sharing, not using MADI, is we don't rely on someone else gaining the mics up, and we don't also wait for someone to suddenly crank up a mic gain halfway through. Hang on, what's happening? So we all look after our own gains from mic level at the stage to what we're doing. Yes, sir.
The Goose mix that you talked about then,
yeah.
How long have you got to work on that before you start?
It's a very good question.
Because I'm also aware of what you're saying about, you know, somebody else in your ear at the same time, which is going to be really, really annoying, I can imagine. So
you get used to it. It turns into what they call cocktail party syndrome. Is you learn to just recognise what's important to you. I have to say, on the Brits, I actually put someone on a pair of headphones, and they tap me on the shoulder if it's anything to do with us. It's too fast moving.
I can also imagine as well that your mix that you start off with,
yeah,
is going to be probably quite different towards the end of the show, because you're always tweaking it, you're getting better and better.
Absolutely.
So your mix at the beginning might be quite really rough.
Well, a little story on that very quickly. I did Tina Turner's, not her last, I did her last tour, which was, 4 years ago, but her last big concert at Wembley in, was it 99, 2000, something like that. It was the farewell tour. So, yeah, it was Wembley Stadium. We were live to air on Sky, and we were supposed to have a band sound check at 4 o'clock. At 4:30, I said, anyone know what's happening with this band sound check? Did someone find out? Oh, they're not coming. Okay, because they'd been touring. And someone had just forgotten to remind someone in the schedule that, you know, here was a whole new setup bolting onto it that was going out to an audience of millions, and fine, Wembley would sound okay. So we got the roadies to just kind of tap round things, but yeah, the first thing we heard was 64 channels of a band playing live to air. So yeah, that one definitely got better from the from the start on. It's even something like the Brits, we'll only get like 2 or 3 run-throughs of a number in the 2 pre-rehearsal days, and then we've got the dress run, and then we're live to air. What we can do now with the wonders of technology is, because we record the rehearsals, okay, once we've got the mic gains right, that's the first thing, whiz across, okay, they're all done. We then put it on multi-track. Now I can flip the desk over and play the multi-track back into it as I'm listening to the mics, fine-tune my monitor mix, flip back to the mics ready for the show. So, and all this can be stored on snapshots and so on. So we've got a huge advantage compared to the analog days, but it still can be a little bit hairy when they go, okay, well, we've got 10 minutes with the artist. Or there was a famous time, slightly embarrassing, but we had Elton John's band, it was New Year's Eve, '02, I think, or something. Anyway, so the band turned up, and we were doing band sound check and so on, and I'm like, okay, that's starting to sound good. And they said, right, that's it. I thought Sir Elton was coming. He was there. And we totally, in amongst just, you know, the hectic, getting the band to sound right, I didn't realise he'd been up there. He sang half a song, and he'd gone, right, that's me done. So we missed that one. But anyway, he sounded fine when we did the show. So, on to the mix. We've got everything on these, we've got this bunch of WAV files, and Pyramix incidentally records a kind of packaged multi-track WAV file format. It's Pyramix's own proprietary format, and you need to burst these out into single WAVs for most other systems. And since we don't mix on Pyramix, that's what we do. Take those away on a hard drive, and this is the equipment that I have in my studio in Twickenham at RSP. I use Nuendo as my favoured multi-track playback system. It's simply the toy that I prefer working with. I've had both pleasant and hideous experiences with other software. This one works for me. I use the Yamaha DM2000 as the main mixing console. It's a fabulous little toy, 96 inputs, totally 5.1 capable, and it sounds very lovely. Again, TC System 6000 wouldn't do without it. Usual reverbs, mastering tools. Now, so we're playing off Nuendo, which is coming out on a MADI stream, which is 64, into 64 channels on the DM2000. So I don't mix in the box, as people call it. I don't like mixing in software. I don't like mousing faders around or little Hueys or whatever. I like a mixing desk to be a mixing desk. I'm sure that will change as the decades move on, but for now I'm old school and I like a mixing desk to mix on. I record the output of that onto Sadie, which is another digital workstation. It's as old as the hills, Sadie. They've done some lovely software revisions along the way, and that's my tool of choice for editing and dubbing. What I record out of the DM2000 are 4 stems, or in this case 4 stems. I've got the backing track, i.e. full band, strings and so on. I've got stereo vocals, so with all the effects, but it's a separate vocal stem. I've then got the front audience and the rear audience. So I've got 4 stereo stems. These, if I wanted to play these 4 stems back the way I'm listening to them while I'm mixing, I just put them in a straight line. What these give me is the opportunity in the mastering stage, without having to go back to a remix with the full multi-track, of just nudging the vocal up and down here and there, of just playing a bit more with the audience levels. When you're mixing, the timescale we get budgets these days, even for a huge DVD like this, is 3 or 4 days to mix approximately 2 hours of music. So we're going pretty fast. If you talk to the rock and roll boys in the studios about that, they'll say, well, we've got 2 months to mix this album, we're still not finished. And we would love that luxury, but budgets say you've got 3 days to mix it and a day of revisions. When you're working at that speed, it's very easy just to kind of, in one song, the vocal's just a bit quieter than you wanted it, and in other songs she's just sitting a bit proud, or the audience sounds a bit flat there. So between these 4 stems, I've kind of found over the years I can pretty much cure it and get it to where I want without having to go back to a remix of the whole track. So I keep those separate, but I also print the mix, my reference mix, which is running through the kind of compression and mastering that I'm going to use in the final process. So that's what I'm listening to, but I can go back a stage without having to go back to the full 64-track multi-track. And I'm also running the guide pictures from, because at this point they're still editing. We haven't got finished pictures like the ones we were looking at there. So we've got guide pictures from the night, which might just be a close-up of her. They might be a wide shot of the stage, or they might be what they call a line cut, which is an active, rough idea of how the pace of the cut's going to work. Same game for the director. It's so he can get a feel for what it's going to ultimately turn out like without committing to it, because they put all their pictures down separately onto VT machines as well. So I'm running that picture as a reference while I'm mixing. Music, if you take a music to picture mix and you take the picture away, it doesn't sound the same. And in the same way that if you did it the other way around, it goes without saying, I'm always very loath to send artists, artist management, labels, A&R, whoever, they say, oh, can we just get an MP3 of the remix of that song? No, I'll send you a quick time of it with the picture, because it sounds different. I could talk about that for days, but we don't have the time. So that's our mix process. I go through track by track. If it's a really tight schedule, I'll maybe try and do 3 tracks in a row. So I've just got one session, one automation session, but generally it's track by track, different toys, different delays, and so on. So post-production. We're going to look now at the different thing. Once I've done that mix, and you'll note that I was putting all these stems down in stereo, but we were talking about a 5.1 final version. This is probably granny sucks eggs to all of you, but just so you know, 5.1, the 5.1 home cinema format is 3 same speakers, left, center, right, the same speaker at the back, left surround, right surround, and then a great big box called the subwoofer. In cinema terms, it's the same channel format, it's 5.1. You've got a left, center, right set of array of speakers which are matched. You've got a diffuse surround field. You've got small surround speakers around the rear walls of the auditorium, and you have a low frequency effects channel. This is quite a big difference between the two. There's both the way the LFE in cinema and the subwoofer in home terms is used, and the way the center channel is used. In cinema, the center channel is affectionately known as the dialogue channel. In home cinema, it's the center. Now, for music, that's quite a big difference. The LFE channel in cinemas is designed for explosions. It's generally a pretty horrible sounding box, but it can shake your trousers at 200 feet. In the home, the subwoofer, as it's called, is generally there, well, it's partly there to extend the frequency response of the little speakers, and we use it very differently for home cinema DVD to the way we treat the 5.1 for cinema. Specifically those 2 channels. There are other differences that we'll come on to, but that's the 5.1 layout. So the way I go from stereo to 5.1, I tried, when 5.1 first came along, and I'd mixed in Dolby Stereo, i.e. Dolby Surround, Pro Logic, call it what you will. I'd mixed in Dolby Stereo, a lot of film scores, a lot of early live music. When 5.1 came along, I tried discrete mixing 5.1, panning things. And personally, I hate ping-pong style. Music is not coming from behind me on music telly. It's coming from the stage. So I put the music across the front. I've got the audience in the back. But it's nice to have some of the reverbs and ambience that you're adding in to just kind of drift around the back a bit. So where do you pan a stereo reverb? Do you put it left and right? Do you pan it halfway back a bit and you run the risk of phasing if someone damages it? And you've left the center channel completely dry, so do you pan it in a bit? Where do you put this stereo reverb? Okay, well, let's use a 5.1 reverb. There are lots of them on the market. They're all very lovely. I generally use between 8 and 10 reverbs on tracks like this. So we're talking about having 60 channels of effects returns just because I want to use all 5.1. Well, that's not going to work either. What about the string pad that one of the keyboard players is playing? It's got its own built-in reverbs. It's probably got a built-in sort of acoustic feel to it. If it's damn good samples, then it will have a kind of the effect of being a non-coherent phase thing where you can lift the ambience out of it. Where do you pan that? Do you put that left and right? Do you not have any strings in the middle? Do you pan it in a bit so it goes a bit mono? Do you try and bring it round a bit so it's a bit warmer in the surrounds? We have this sort of legacy of so many stereo sources, not least from the stage and from the favoured toys that we like to use, but a practicality here of how many channels and how much time have you got to pinpoint everything until it sounds perfect. Enter, there are a few of them on the market, but enter the TC6000, which has the most brilliant unwrap algorithms, as they're called, and they will basically take a stereo signal and using its phase coherence, they'll extract, so here's your starting point stereo. And as we all know, if you listen to stereo, you can hear stuff in the middle because it's coming out the same from both speakers. So it'll take that and derive a center channel for you. Anything that's totally common comes out the center. Anything that is specifically left and right will stay there. It then starts looking at the phase coherence and softness of ambience and so on, and it'll start pushing that round to the back. It'll take anything below whatever you set, 60 hertz, 80 hertz, and shove that into the subwoofer for you. You've got complete control over this, and you can control how much of your original stereo, let's say it extracts this into the center, well, you can control how much it takes out of the left and right. So this is a very, very clever box, and this saves us not only hours in the studio of trying to do a discrete 5/1 mix, it actually sounds better. So that's the route we go. So I take the track, these stems that I was talking about, take the track, add the vocals, send those off to the unwrapper. They come back as a 5/1. I've now got my front audience, which I put in the front, and I've got my rear audience, which I put behind, and then send that whole lot off into a 5/1 mastering compression. That may sound like cheating, but everyone does it, and it works brilliantly. So if you're ever asked to create something 5/1, unless it's very fine detail sound design, or you've got the budget for a Spielberg movie, then unwrapping is a brilliant way of doing it, especially for music when you're stuck with these stereo sources. Aiming for home cinema dynamic range. Home cinema reference level is supposed to be 75 dB as opposed to cinema 85 dB. So we always do our reference mastering at 75 dB. It's always a bit disappointingly quiet, and anyone with a decent system is going to listen louder, but standards are standards. So going back, remember we said the cinema, you have the center channel is the dialogue channel. Now, I've seen a lot of people's 5/1 home setups, and the center speaker is either behind the telly, or it's up on the bookshelf at the top, or it's under the floor, or it's never that point source for the middle of the screen that you want. So I make sure for a home cinema mix that I can mute the center channel and the mix doesn't fall apart. It's going to sound different, but it's got to still be workable. And same goes if I mute the LFE, subwoofer channel for home 5/1. It can't lose any punch, drive, whatever, even though we're dribbling in bits of kick drum and bass and whatever, low synths. Those two are such mavericks in the home environment, we can't trust them to be there. So those are considerations. We make sure the thing's going to work, however it's going to be played back. Cinema. Cinema is great. I know pretty much what level people are going to listen to it at. I know pretty much the frequency response of the system in the cinema. I know how the diffuse surround system is going to be set up. It's a great joy. I've also got a captive audience. I haven't got a channel hopping audience. I haven't got someone listening at any odd level at home, turning it up, turning it down. I've got a captive audience. I can now relax with all the hello mums in the mix, all the high compression in the mastering that you need for telly and home cinema. You can treat this like a big live arena. You can make the quiet bits quiet. You can scare the hell out of people with big loud moments. The pyro can explode in the LFE channel. All this wonderful stuff. It's a much more, you're getting a much more emotional response because you're much more in control of how you're playing the audience through a sequence. So especially when you've got an artist as emotional as this, you can really have a lot of fun with it. So I love mixing and mastering for cinema. I probably, in the timescales and the budgets that we have to work with, probably won't go back to a remix of the track. I'm going back to my uncompressed stems and the unwrapper. In this case, I'm driving the unwrapper quite hard on removing what's going into the center speaker out of the left and right, because I'm creating a dialogue channel. I want Adele's voice to come out of the center speaker, and not, if you're sitting over here, which is why the center speaker exists in the first place, that you're getting Adele out of that speaker. So it's all to drive the stereo image towards a coherent center and a wider left and right. So I use the same stems. If I run into trouble and it's just not, you know, I've done something in the mix which isn't big enough for cinema or isn't relaxed enough, whatever, yeah, then I'll go back to the mix. But generally, I'm working with those original stems. We've got a reference level for cinema, what projectionists call 7 on the dial, which is 85 dB, and that's what we master at. If it's a big release, I'll take it, well, I used to take it up the road to Twickenham Film Studios to their new Dolby Premiere suite. They've sadly just had to close their doors after how many decades? So I will, you know, I'll take it to a big theatrical dubbing suite, because although my room is lined up by Dolby and I know that it's set perfectly, it's just a different experience being in a room this size, looking at it on a screen that size, compared to us looking at it on our big plasma and so on. So that's a final check. It's £1,000 if the client wants to spend it, and I always recommend they do. But you know, technically, I'm happy for it to leave us without having been through that final check. The CD output. The CD was released on the Adele release. It was bundled with the DVD. It's cute. You can put the CD in your car. You can have the DVD at home. We're now looking at a real kind of commercial album type approach. The vocal settles back into the track. We've got more compression on it. It's much more consistent. It's designed to be played at low levels. It's designed to work across multiple systems. So there's a bit of a compromise. It's got to work on an iPod. It's got to work in the car. It's got to work at home. And so when I'm mastering a CD, I'll basically get to the end of it, take it off, and just play it in different places whenever I have a spare moment. I'll put it on my PC in the office and play it quietly out of the little Yamaha speakers I've got. CD mastering is just a little more intense because you've got so many different ways of a CD being played, even or especially after it's been turned into a nasty little MP3. We then, once I'm happy with that mastering, we then do what's called a PQ process on a CD. I'm sure many of you have heard of that process. This is basically marking up the tracks on the CD so that because what leaves us is what actually gets written onto the distributed CD. The reason they're called PQ codes is because that's the start of the track and that's the end of the track, just old traditional markers. So we've got those various formats, the home cinema and TV, the cinema and the CD, all being given quite different final approaches, but all derived from this same source material, and if I've got it right and they're malleable enough, from the same stems of track, vocal, front audience, rear audience. What's the overall game in getting to these final formats? It's an emotional response from the audience. That's, you know, music is an emotional language. Whether it's Adele or AC/DC, it's an emotional language. And we're trying in each of these in their own different ways, and with drawing on every little bit of experience of having done that format before, of getting the hairs up on the back of the audience's necks. Technically correct, of course it has to be. Artistically, there is no right and wrong, and this applies to front of house mixing as much as it does to studio mixing or live broadcast. It's only right when you've got an increase in the heartbeat. It's only right when you've got people saying, she's just fabulous, isn't she? So that's the game with all of these, and they all have to be treated and respected in slightly different ways to get that response in each of those environments.